Welcome everybody. Webinar 8 this year with the focus on the gas landscape in Southern Africa. We are very excited with this topic today, something different, something out of my comfort zone, but that is where we learn and that is where we grow. Remember, we have 2 buttons in the webinar that we would love your interactions. The first button is the chat button. There you can talk nonsense if you want to, but also reach out to people. Please don't ask questions on the chat button. When we do the Q&A later on, we are trying to only look at the Q&A button for the questions. But in the chat today, you're going to get a lot of information that we share with you, links and explanations. So please use the chat for general things that you want to talk about, but also for following the links and extra information we are sending to you. For those who are looking on YouTube, we will try to link it into the YouTube description so that you have access to that information as well. The second button is the Q&A button. Please, any question, we would love to answer your questions. Our first part of the webinar today will be talking and discussing things, but with our questions. But then we want to hear your questions and what do you want to do? And we ask that for our speakers today. So please make use of that and help us to ask the right questions and get the right answers for today's webinar. This is webinar 8. We've had 7 webinars already, and what a journey it has been for us. We went from Sasol's plans to practical plans to overviews to a lot of things. In the chat box, you'll see the list of all the many webinars we've had already. If you're interested in any of the topics and you couldn't attend, just go to our YouTube channel. The link will be in the chat. And go and look at all the others and send us an email if you have a question that you want answering. So no way to miss out on any of the webinars. The webinars have the speaker section in the one week, and the next week we normally post the Q&A session as a separate video for you to go through. You can subscribe to our email list so that you don't lose out. You can check us on LinkedIn, where we also share interesting information. So please, we would love it to be a two-way discussion, and we would love your feedback, your questions, and also the topics. We are starting to plan for next year's webinar, and we would love to hear the topics that you want us to discuss within this forum and share with you. Thank you, Kevin, and everyone helping me with posting things. But today we are talking about the South African regulatory environment, specifically focused on gas. Oh, yeah, I'm out of my depth here. I am no lawyer. You know, they have a language of their own. But what is so funny is, as engineers sometimes also have a language of our own. When we get together and our non-engineer friends are there, we talk engineering and they get lost. So what I've tried to do with the preparation, there was a lot of acronyms thrown out there that I had no idea what it stands for. I want to share with you, for instance, PASA or PASA. And when I Googled it, it told me it's the Payment Association of South Africa, or it is the Publisher Association of South Africa. But no, today we are talking about the Petroleum Agency of South Africa. So what I've done is the acronyms that I thought will be most relevant in the webinar today. I've tried to get the right name, even links to the websites where you can either get the act that we are talking about or the association that we are talking about, and you are able to follow us in that way. And we're also going to try to post that into the YouTube description for the people who don't listen to the webinar live. So yes, today we have a slightly different approach. If you've looked at a few of our webinars up till now, where we will have introducing a speaker and then the presentation, today we do it slightly different. So I'm even more out of my comfort zone, but we think this different approach will give more value to you as a listener. So I'm going to introduce all three speakers prior, and then one by one they'll come up, and I'll have a type of an interview style, asking questions and them responding. And let's see where it goes and how it works. But today we are focusing on regulations. What works? What doesn't work? What can be done to attract more investment in the gas projects of our country? You know, I'm so excited when I hear we have natural resources in our country. What is in our hand? And in our hand is all these natural resources. Often we see more and more companies doing exploration, finding more and more gas. With that, we hear there's a looming gas cliff. There's a problem, but there is a solution. There's just a bit of a timeline problem between the two. And how can we solve this problem? And yes, we don't want to solve one problem by creating a new problem. We don't want to fast track things without thinking it through, without planning it properly, without going through all the check boxes that make sure a project is solid and everything is being looked at. That is the reason why we have regulations and why there's good things to think of before we go. But it's not always perfect. We're not in a perfect world, and it's sometimes frustrating. So it's going to be real today. We're going to talk about the real concerns, but I would love us to finish on a note to say, so what? What can we do now? And this is where we are heading to. We want to implement things in a responsible way. And how does that look like? Long intro, I know, but let's jump in. So we have three speakers for you today. The first speaker, and I'm going to introduce the one after the other one that you know who we are dealing with. Our first speaker is Anton Putter. He's one of our OTC partners and consultants. He started off his career as a process engineer, but he ended his corporate career by setting up and managing many businesses. But after his corporate career, he stayed very busy. He's even very busy today doing this webinar, so we really appreciate the time that all our speakers put in. So the last few years, Anton has worked on a part-time basis, mostly consulting a non-executive director capacity. Initially, he started to support the BEE entities in an advisory capacity, representing their ownership stakes on board and on committee levels. That led to him getting involved in the gas industry in South Africa, especially natural gas, where he worked on Igoli gas, retail gas, and since 2013, he's very involved in the activities of OTC, and we love his inputs on our projects. And I think there's much more to tell, but in a nutshell, that is speaker one, Anton Putter. Our next speaker for the day, and it's not in the order that I'm going to call them up, is Barrisford Petertsen. A very interesting character with a lot of different skills. So ones we are focusing on today is that he's the founder and majority stakeholder of Bastion Oil and Gas. He's a specialist oil and gas attorney, and is also the founder and MD of the law firm BBP Law Incorporated. Barrisford has worked with and assisted successful oil and gas companies in the acquisition of oil and gas rights in various jurisdictions in the African continent. So Barrisford can't only speak about South Africa, but he can even speak further than the boundaries of South Africa. As the former manager, legal services of the South African National Oil Company, he was intricately involved in the successful Oryx, and Sable offshore oil and gas development projects east of Mossel Bay, South Africa. A man with a broad range of experience, but very specifically focused on what we are talking today. The third speaker that I'm introducing is Craig Morkel. Craig has been a member of Parliament between 1999 and 2009, where he served on several committees, including Minerals and Energy, Science and Technology, and Defence. He co-founded Ikapa Energy in 2014, and currently he is the CEO of that company. He has been chairman of the Gas Economy Leadership Team of SAOGA, the South African Oil and Gas Alliance. You'll see the link in our chat box, which is the industry association that represents the oil and gas industry. In 2024, Craig was also appointed as co-chairman of the Energy and Digital Economy Focus Group from the Eastern Cape Premier's Investment Council. A mouthful. 3 speakers with vast experience, slightly different approaches, who are going to teach and show us what the landscape is out there, what to look out for, and where to go next. Let's get going. Our first speaker that I'm going to call up to talk to me is Anton Putter. Thank you, Anton. So Anton, the gas cliff is real. We have gas, what's keeping us back. But Anton is going to give us a background and the overall picture to set the pace and the scene for today's webinar. Anton, over to you. You're muted, Anton. All these buttons, camera, mute.
Half of what I wanted to say, I did say before you could hear me. Good morning to everybody, and thank you, Wilmien. I'm going to be very short. We have the privilege of having Barrisford and Craig with us this morning, so I'm going to take as far as possible a bit of a backseat. But maybe just to set the scene, as you call it, Wilmien. As you know, OTC's prime objective in life is to help owners setting up businesses, setting up projects, and assisting them in driving business. In the execution of this, very specifically in South Africa, we've come to realize that one of the biggest inhibitors to the development of gas business in South Africa is the regulatory environment. Our clients, the owners, keep on running against the regulatory environment in all sorts of ways and manners. And that is why we decided it would be very beneficial to have a discussion about the regulatory environment. And fortunately, we were very fortunate to get Craig and Barrisford to talk to us today. I think you can, with safety, say, yeah, these are probably the 2 main role players in there, or the people with the best understanding of this. And of course, one must always distinguish. I mean, it's not just many laws which impact on the gas industry, but there's many government and semi-government institutions which has an impact on this, whether that be PASA, as Wilmien has mentioned there, or NERSA, which is the area of more of my involvement, as we'll see today. NERSA, Wilmien, and after you've told us to do that. So NERSA stands for the National the Energy, sorry about that, National...
No, we have it in the chat. We have it in the chat.
We have it in the chat, okay.
National Energy Regulator of South Africa.
Of South Africa, and we've specifically here talking about the piped gas part of the regulator. We all know NERSA from the electricity side. In our specific area, it's the piped gas. And I'll come back a bit later if there's any questions on that to talk about that specifically. But probably the bigger problems are on the other side, on the front end of the gas development projects, on the exploratory side and on the production side. And I think, Wilmien, we should get to that side, and then we get Barrisford and Craig to talk to us about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. Absolutely. It's been such a learning curve for me to interact with Barrisford and Craig to understand. And I think I only have a small understanding with the vast information that is there. And we are trying to cram a lot of things into this first hour and the Q&A today to try to address everything that's out there. And I'm learning as well, as Anton has shown me, that NERSA's may be upstream, PASA's may be downstream, and put all that together. But let us ask Craig. And Craig, I thought you are very good at sketching that bigger picture, sketching the framework for us of this gas environment. and the regulatory environment. So Craig, if you can, yeah, Craig is with us. Just unmute. Remember to unmute, and tell us a little bit what gets regulated in this gas landscape, and how does it work from your viewpoint?
Firstly, let me say thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I've watched as many of the previous 7 as possible, and I want to thank you for bringing the technical expertise, the engineering side of things, into perspective through your webinars as OTC. I think it's necessary because the devil is in the detail, and often people misunderstand the technology. They must understand the engineering involved. And so part of my intention today is to share with the participants, with the audience, where the big picture is and where they might fit into that big picture. So I'd like you to share, if you don't mind, Wilmien, the business process map that we've shared with you. And I want to talk through the big picture of the oil and gas industry to give viewers and participants an impression of where their most pertinent issue might be located within the energy landscape and oil and gas in particular. What you see in front of you is a business process map that we put together in the Eastern Cape Premier's Investment Council's Energy Focus Group. That Energy Focus Group is tech agnostic, so we have all of the other energy pathways, energy technologies represented there, including solar, wind, battery storage, nuclear, coal, and gas. And when we talk about the gas industry, what are we actually talking about? Well, there are 3 parts to the gas industry's value chain. We first have upstream, which is the exploration and production of oil and gas, either onshore or offshore. That gas is then either piped or liquefied for onward transport in liquefied state at minus 162 degrees Celsius and is compressed from gaseous state into liquid state by 600 times of compression. That makes it easier to transport in liquid form, but you cannot transport liquefied LNG in a pipeline too far, because then you have heat ingress, and the heat ingress causes boil-off gas in the pipe and therefore can result in unplanned outages. So to avoid that, you keep an LNG pipe very short, only to deliver it to a regasification unit or vaporizer, as they say that, to the inlet flange of your gas appliance. And pipe gas, you don't need to do the regasification part. You directly feed it into the inlet flange of your gas appliance. If it were gas to power, obviously the flow rate of the gas into your gas to power unit, whether it be a gas turbine or a reciprocating engine, that feed-in gas needs to match the dispatch which you desire that appliance to operate at. And so the load factor is a function of how much fuel you're putting in, and so you have to work that back all the way to your gas field. Your exploration will obviously, as Barrisford will explain later, tell you what might be there based on the geological work done. And then when you do the actual drilling during the exploration phase, you confirm what's there, you move it up the value chain from prospective to contingent, and then resources to finally to reserves. And you can go to the bank with that and say to off-takers, this is how much gas I have here, this is what I can supply to you by then, and this is the price. Now, I want to therefore go to the business process map and say, where do we locate issues along that value chain, along those activities, upstream, midstream, and downstream? And this business process map is intended to do that. If you look below each of the pathways there, solar, wind, battery storage, gas, nuclear, and coal, you'll see just below that block is one that says activities, whether it's program activities or project activities, whether it be upstream, midstream, or downstream. You can look at issues of a regulatory and even a legal nature in this business process map. Below the projects in the, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, in the 5th row of buttons there, you would see it refers to specific disciplines. Firstly, the technical discipline in which engineers, scientists, technologists, technicians, artisans fall into that category. You are designing a facility or a piece of infrastructure or a process to get the gas out of the ground and deliver it to the inlet flange of your gas appliance. That design then has a engineering design level detail. Depending on the level of design detail, it will then determine the accuracy of your financial modeling. The financial modeling is assessed by your technical experts. The financial model will typically give you some key numbers. An input number might be what is the input cost in a upstream facility. Offshore, is it mainly dollar denominated input costs? Onshore, is it mainly domestic currency, in this case rand denominated input costs? Barrisford will be able to talk to that in a lot more detail later. But essentially, your engineering design informs your financial model and ultimately the return on investment to your investors. The cost of the gas is directly then linked to your internal rate of return, which of course indicates that you've exceeded the cost of the project and made some profit margin, including your ability to amortize the investment or repay the finance for any of the work that has been done. The technical and financial part, many might say, is the easy part because you can do that as businesses dealing with other businesses. But to keep order and to avoid, the kind of picture we saw with the diamond rush and the gold rush, you needed some order. Everyone can't just come with a pick and shovel and decide they're going to dig a hole. They had to create order. And for the orderly utilization of our natural resources, including oil and gas, we have to regulate certain activities. And the main piece of legislation for upstream has been and remains the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. I know it's a mouthful. Repeat, the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. And that has now been reconsidered for various reasons and has resulted in the drafting and adoption of what is called the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act, which is intended to replace the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. It does two things.
Craig, sorry, Craig, just for our audience as well, I've put both of those links to the acts into the chat box, so it is available if anyone wants detail on that.
Thank you, Wilmien. Thank you for sharing that. So the MPRDA, the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act, is in effect at present. It has been for a number of years. It has served as the basis for investment, and it has provided adequate regulatory certainty on which to model certain risks. And I'm sure Barrisford will speak to that a bit later as well. Without being able to model your risks, you cannot model your rewards, and therefore you cannot make investment decisions. We have been fortunate enough that there have been investment decisions made under the MPRDA. However, by introducing the UPRDA, the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act, it introduced the act, which has now been through the parliamentary process, but we have not seen any final regulations, nor have we seen a final fiscal package which says what the tax regime would be, how much depreciation could be considered for upstream, midstream, and downstream projects, And obviously, Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act only deals with the upstream part, but it has a knock-on effect further midstream and downstream. We are at the stage now where the UPRDA, as I said, the regulations are out for comment. The comments have been received. It's being processed. And we hope the government takes on board the wisdom shared with it by industry, not only through SAOGA as an industry association, but through other oil and gas related industry associations as well. Last but not least, we mustn't forget that we are doing this for a reason. What is that reason? Well, yes, businesses need to serve their shareholders, and that's called shareholder value. But we also serve communities in which we operate. We also serve the country in which we operate. And that is more broadly referred to as stakeholder value. What is the value that we're adding to society? How does oil and gas and the energy system serve the greater good? And that you can measure through the socioeconomic impacts, whether it be through ownership, skills development, supply and enterprise development, local content. Think about that number again, 80% of the input cost offshore oil and gas production is denominated in US dollars. That means those input costs are for goods and services that are denominated in oil and in US dollars. Whereas there are those onshore developers who will tell you that in up to 80% of their input costs are denominated in South African rand. That says that they will be procuring those goods and services locally. So local content becomes very important to establish the supply chain, to enhance supply and enterprise development in the supply chain, including from engineering firms, right? Including from OEMs and other equipment suppliers, and of course in the operations and maintenance of these facilities. Ultimately, Upstream collects royalty taxes, which has a fiscal impact, right? It enhances the tax base of government, and that's through the royalty tax scheme that is attached to the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act. We don't know what it will look like under the UPRDA, but certainly one cannot make any investment decisions based on the UPRDA without the full package, the Act, the regulations, and the fiscal package being known, so that investors could model their risks and rewards. Last but not least, when we talk about energy supply, it must match energy demand. And that is a function of the security of supply, the electrons, we call it the molecules in oil and gas, serves various industries, including electricity. But we must remember that the electricity industry in South Africa is the smaller portion of our final energy consumed. The majority of final energy consumption is actually thermal energy, 68%. And so when we talk about an energy crisis, we are talking about more than just an electricity crisis. There is not just a power cliff, there is also a gas cliff. And that gas cliff will result in the loss of more than 75,000 jobs if we do not solve that urgently. And the urgency is in the planning and the development work that one has to do a couple of years ahead of the actual flow of electrons to the clients of Sasol at present who rely on gas from Mozambique. But there is onshore gas, right? There is onshore gas. So we need to look at that 22 trillion cubic feet of gas that is onshore in and around the coal fields that we know so well already, has kept this country alive through the coal-fired power stations. And that 22 TCF, if one were to put that into perspective, 1 TCF approximately gives you about 1.2 gigawatts of gas to power that could then operate, if it needed to, at full tilt, 80% plus load factor, if it needed to, for 20 years. That, I mean, is avoiding one TCF avoids one stage of load shedding for 20 years. Right? We have 22 TCF in the Amersfoort, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, KZN region that Barrisford can talk to in a lot more detail, given that his company, Bastion, is one of several upstream rights holders in that part of our country, the economic heartland of our country. Last but not least, on this business process map, one needs to say, well, okay, if everything is hunky-dory, you know, then there's no problem, but we do have challenges. And where are those challenges? Well, you could link any technical, financial, socioeconomic, and sector development issue to policy. It has a regulatory provision in either a piece of legislation, a regulatory document called the regulations, which is attached normally to the Act. You then have regulatory rules that are determined by your relevant regulator. For upstream, it is PASA, as you correctly pointed out earlier. For midstream and downstream, it's NERSA, and both regulators have a role to play in the oil and gas value chain, but at a particular part of the value chain. Upstream, PASA, the licensing authority, has carved the country up into blocks, and we can show you where those blocks are. On the PASA website, there's a map called the Hub Map that says where they've identified blocks and invited upstream players, exploration companies, to apply for rights on a first-come, first-served basis. That is now going to change when we switch from the MPRDA to the UPRDA. Barris will tell you a lot more about that. It's no longer a first-come, first-served process, but an auction process, a competitive bidding process. Right? So where do we find the challenges that we can intervene in the policy space? Well, the legislation, the regulations, and to be very clear, the regulations cannot fix legislation. If you have legislation that has been signed by the president already, as is the case with the UPRDA, and you then subsequently release regulations that are still aligned to that act, but still don't solve the problems. You cannot solve problems in law with a regulation or a regulatory rule. We have to go back to the Principal Act. And the Principal Act is flawed, and I'm sure Barrisford, as a specialist lawyer, will speak to that in a lot more detail. Last but not least, we will see that there are interventions that may be required in the planning area. So policy is followed by planning. The master planning we have ultimately will be the integrated energy plan, but it covers both thermal and electrical energy as the IEP. The integrated resource plan covers electricity only, but all of the technologies, including gas to power. And you then have the Electricity Regulation Act that also governs who is responsible for procurement, who is responsible for initiating a procurement process under Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act, which now makes provision after its recent amendment for government to not only procure the downstream asset, a gas to power facility as an example, but also to procure the interrelated infrastructure. So the pipelines, the grid infrastructure is also the responsibility of the Department of Electricity and Energy under Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act. Now, this becomes important because planning gives you a 20-year or 30-year view of where the investment opportunities will come, because it determines the technology and the capacity required from each technology to keep the lights on, to avoid the power cliff and to avoid the gas cliff. And that then results in procurement, either by the public sector, such as the IPP office or ESCOM or municipalities, but also directly by industry, given that the Electricity Regulation Act has been amended, in particular Schedule 2, to allow for private power purchase agreements to be entered into between a business called an independent power producer and another business, an off-taker, such as an industrial gas user or a gas-to-power facility. Last but not least, that procurement program is how we then achieve the policy objectives and the capacity per technology within the particular given time frame. Procurement is how we do it, and that's where we're stuck right now. The master plans are guides and not firm execution plans or even project execution plans. That, we believe, should be done on a corridor-for-corridor basis, because within the corridor is where you find demand that must be matched by supply within that corridor. One of the corridors that is fairly advanced in its development is the northeastern corridor from Richards Bay to Gauteng, where there are plans to import LNG via the Zululand Energy Terminal, but also we need to integrate the onshore gas, that 22 TCF that we mentioned earlier, that could also supply existing demand within the Gauteng, Mpumalanga, KZN area. Last but not least, we see an opportunity here to deal with poverty, unemployment, and inequality as our primary metric, our purpose. And you can measure that with your socioeconomic contributions in each project and as a sector and as an industry. Wilmien, I want to leave it there for now, but please, viewers, participants should feel free, even any of the other panelists, including yourself, Wilmien, if there are any questions that you need to clarify, please feel free to ask, and I will do my best to answer them. I don't know everything, but I love being surrounded by people who do. Thank you.
Oh, wow, Craig. And you know, there's a few things that popped out for me as you were talking. Us as humans, for us to be alive and to thrive, we need energy. You can't live and thrive if you don't have energy. And for me, it sounds the same in our country. For our country's economy and for the socio-economic development of this country, to be alive and to thrive, we need energy. And I was really shocked when you said 75,000 jobs will be lost.
More than. And those are the direct jobs. We're not even talking about the indirect jobs here.
Yes.
So let me qualify that further if I have 3 seconds. That is livelihoods that have families who have that they feed, and if you don't keep those jobs alive, the dependent industries below that take those components made from gas, take those commodities, including the plastic, as an example, molded plastics for packaging for the automotive industry is under serious threat. If glass products, the bottles that we use, Consol Glass, one of the potential companies that will not receive adequate gas. Waar gaan die manne hulle biere dan drink, Wilmien?
Ons vrouens is okay. The ladies will be fine. We will get. But it's real, Craig. And what I love that you say there's 22 TCF available. It's 22 times more than one level of load shedding, if I can say it in those words. And imagine it won't only save the more than 75,000 jobs, but how many more jobs can be created in our country, solving major unemployment problems. And it's there, it's available. We need to get it in so that we can move forward, so that South Africa can thrive. And that makes me excited, but it makes me concerned in the same way.
Wilmien, it's a concern that we all share, but not only as businesses, as citizens. If we do not solve these problems, it will come over our fences as in the form of crime.
Yes, unfortunately.
Do not solve poverty, it will come and visit us. Poverty will come and visit us.
Okay. Craig, that's a reality check. Thank you so much for that. I'm concerned, but I'm excited as well. And as an engineer, I want to jump in and get into solutions and make it work. But we have a reality that we are facing, and Barrisford is going to take us further in sketching this picture. So Barrisford, I'm going to ask you, starting, if you can come online, Barrisford, if we can see your face. Oh, Barrisford, I know you've had a lot of pain in this environment and you understand it, but I want to start off with my first question. What is right currently in the regulatory environment? Is there anything that's right, and what is right?
Very good question. I think that, I have to differentiate. I'm historically an oil and gas lawyer, been involved in the oil and gas industry in South Africa since 1994, and was part of the development of the MPRDA when the Petroleum Agency was one of my clients. And what we did was we went through an extensive consultation process, looking at various countries to put the laws into place, which we currently have under the MPRDA. The challenge was that you can put the act together, you can put the regulation together, but the most important criteria is what is the commercial deal that is being offered to an investor, a South African investor, or an international investor. And that is not just a combination of the act and the regulations, it's a combination of the act, the regulations, the actual granting instruments that are used. In South Africa, we have TCPs, exploration rights and production rights. And then auxiliary legislation, for example, what is the royalties that need to be put in place? What are the exchange control legislations put in place? What are the customs and excise duties that are applicable? So there's a full commercial package. I mean, obviously, also what the Income Tax Act says with regard to oil and gas. So any oil and gas company looking at South Africa as an investment destination has to model that profile of what's the commercial deal being offered versus what is the risk reward of the geology in the country. And when we moved from, I think it was originally we had the Minerals Act, and then oil and gas was regulated by the Mining Rights Act in South Africa, because the Minerals Act never provided for oil and gas exploration, strangely enough. And an amendment had to be made to the Minerals Act, and we found ourselves in a situation that we were using a repealed act to govern oil and gas. So there was a definite need. Investors found it very challenging to find themselves guided by a piece of legislation that had been repealed but brought into life once again for purposes of oil and gas. So we put in, what was put in place was the MPRDA. A lot of consultation took place with regard to the MPRDA. We looked at creating a full package. However, believe it or not, when the act and the regulations were brought into law, did not get investors' attention. It was only 3 or 4 years later, once investors were able to model the full fiscal package, the Royalty Act was brought into being, the income tax was amended, I think it was Schedule 10 of the Income Tax Act. The customs duty and excise legislation was exchange control legislation. From that point forward, I think that was around about 2007, 2008, even though the MPRDA was put in place in 2004. So you can see that, getting the right fiscal package is just as important as the legislation that is put into place. And we attracted a lot of investment into our country. The challenge that arose after that was that we started attracting a lot of interest. That interest was attracted also, a lot of companies were seeing the potential of what they call the shale gas in the Karoo. The numbers were rather optimistic at that point in time. And I think from that point, government looked at the industry and said, listen, if this is the significant potential, you know, what's the state's position in terms of the, shouldn't we be getting a bigger piece of the action? And we had what was brought in then was in 2013 was the MPRDA amendment bill. And, you know, many of the criticisms, you know, were leveled at South Africa, you know, with regard to legislation is this idea of legislative uncertainty. South Africa, nobody's going to make an investment or will take a significant risk in making that investment if they don't have regulatory certainty. The strange thing that we have in our country is that as we are sitting right now, we actually have regulatory uncertainty. Regulatory certainty. The challenge is that by introducing new legislation, without the full fiscal package, we are as a country are introducing regulatory uncertainty because the investor looking at the country doesn't know what is the full investment decision commercial deal that is being structured. So they can't model their risk. And investment, at least oil and gas exploration companies, are more than willing to take the risk below the ground because that's what they can manage. But when you start increasing the risk above the ground, and it's not, I mean, there's a lot of additional legislation that has been created in our country right now that in expropriation without compensation, all these seek to increase the risk, or at least the investor's perception of risk. As far as South African geology is concerned, I mean, the fact that I started Bastion, I left my practice in the practice of the law and started an oil and gas company. After looking around at what opportunities existed in the African continent, I made a decision that, you know, South Africa is where I want to be. And we looked at a number of onshore acreages. I mean, we're a small company, but we do not have the size and the scale of the big majors and listed companies, including small cap companies. So we looked seriously at South Africa. I'm very blessed to have a phenomenal, it's not myself alone, I have a phenomenal team. I have excellent geologists, excellent finance. So we have a very good team that looked critically at this and made the decision that we want to invest in South Africa. And the opportunity that we looked at was to follow the example set by Kinetico Energy. And Kinetico Energy entered our country, I think it was around about 2011. They have successfully drilled about 44 wells. I think it's about 44 wells. And they've been, I think, successful in almost all of their wells. So they proved that South Africa has onshore gas. So the next step is, you know, this is the model you follow is you have an idea, you look at the geology, does it justify the spending of the money, and then you drill. And from that, you can develop there's a resource scale called, you move the gas up a value chain. It's a Society of Petroleum Engineers value chain, and you move it from prospective gas resources to contingent gas resources. And once you have contingent gas resources, you can now, if with a development plan and a gas price, or at least a target gas price, you can move that contingent resources up to reserves. Now, a lot of this information, I think Kinetico is sitting with approximately 11 TCF of gas, and that is both prospective and it is contingent resources. And they're in the process, what they've been doing is been significant. You have an estimate of gas, but what you need to understand is that can these fields deliver gas at an appropriate flow rate that justifies a gas sales agreement that you can, as a oil and gas exploration company, can you sell on terms and justify that you can provide gas to an off-taker over a specific period of time? Whether that off-taker be an energy consumer, whether that off-taker be a company that wishes to transition from coal to gas, at the end of the day, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can flow that quantity of gas. And that's all of these are highly complex agreements that need to be put in place. Behind all of these agreements, we need to have certainty that things are not going to change into the future, because that will affect all of these complex transactions, one must always remember, is based on detailed financial economic models, and those economic models are based on assumptions. So I hope that gives you a general idea of what the landscape is. I think South Africa, from a positive point of view, Kinetico has achieved quite recently, and I think another company called D3 Energy, they have been flow testing their wells. There's been recent public announcements, and the volumes that they're able to flow are extremely exciting for our country, which means that whereas previously you may have said, listen, there's gas that has been discovered, but is it sufficient gas to flow at an appropriate rate so that you can sell it over a long period of time? And I think the confidence level has gone up. I think we're no longer looking at onshore gas as a pure exploration play. It's now what I call a appraisal development play. And once you start moving into appraisal development, you start attracting finance. Nobody finances upstream exploration. We have to remember that. And it is up to the oil and gas company to raise the finance, to model the risk and say, is it worthwhile investing this money? Now, coming back onto that, I think, how much time do I have, by the way, Wilmien? I want to use it wisely.
Yeah. Barrisford, I did start you off slightly late. Apologies for that. And for the attendees, I'm going to run a little bit into Q&A time. So please bear with us, because I think there's a few very specific points that we still want to get to. So Barrisford, if we can, 5 minutes.
I'm going to focus on those. I'm going to focus on that.
What's a challenge?
I think that we have to be cognizant of the changing of the legislation. On the desk is the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act. It's not yet law. They're busy drafting the regulations are being drafted, but that's not the end. Without the remainder, without the granting instruments, the specific wording of the granting instruments, without the necessary amendments to the Income Tax Act, without the necessary amendments to the royalties to make it applicable to the current environment, we are going to sit in a vacuum and a lacuna as to what the future looks like. Having looked at these pieces of legislation, I have a very simple question that I'm struggling to find the answer to, and that is, why do we need the UPRDA right now? I've yet to find I love the idea. I've always advocated that it's in the best interest of our country that oil and gas be separated from minerals. So I've been a strong proponent of that, but not at the expense of creating further legislative uncertainty that restricts investment into our country, which is already challenging right now. We're seeing a lot of companies who have invested significant amounts of money in South Africa, seen them shift over to Namibia. The strange thing is, Namibia has done very little in terms of its regulatory environment. It has remained stable for the past 15, 16 years, if memory serves me correct. So what has attracted them to Namibia is the support they're getting from government to explore, and the stability that has been. Government has not expressed its intention. It may consider that now with the vast amount of companies entering Namibia, but the best thing that it can do is keep everything certain and stable until you start having significant production projects, and then deal with it from that point forward. In South Africa also, we have we've made some mistakes, and what we've done is there's a lot of projects, oil and gas related, and I'm not only talking about upstream, I'm also talking about downstream and midstream. And I think some of us missed the boat in 2014. We missed the amendment that was made to the National Environmental Management Act of 2014, and that has had serious consequences. South Africa has a strong green lobby, and that lobby has made it very clear that they are opposed to oil and gas projects in this country. They have their reasons, so be it. I'm not going to argue whether they are right or wrong, but what I'm going to say is that we have a situation in 2014 where section 43.7 of NEMA was amended, and everybody missed one crucial element of that, and that is that after an oil and gas companies spend millions, and it also applies to projects, downstream projects, power generation projects, and will apply to any project with regard to the importation of LNG. And what has happened is that in 2014, NEMA was amended such that any appeal to the minister regarding an approved environmental authorization is automatically, I think you've got the provision there, if you look very carefully at it, it's 14, section 43. Now, if you look at under A, you'll see a 0.7. The NEMA was amended. Before it used to say, an appeal under this section does not suspend an environmental authorization. That does not has now been removed from NEMA, which means that consequently a environmental authorization on the mere submission of appeal, regardless of the quality of that appeal, automatically suspends an environmental authorization. And an environmental authorization in any oil and gas project is a critical path. It's often a condition precedent to the projects moving forward. It's a condition precedent to project development agreements, and it's a condition precedent to funding. And these contracts take a significant period of time to put into place. And here we have an amendment that I think we missed the impact of this amendment. And now this is being used as the doorway to stop oil and gas projects. We have, I think through SAOGA, have also lobbied that we should seriously consider moving back to the pre-2014 position. And I mean, there are a lot of smarter people than me who know how to draft these provisions, but that is a contentious issue now. And we see that prevalent in many of the projects. We also deal with the challenges of government who are under-resourced in certain areas, so things take a lot longer. We need to be careful with regard to that. So I hope our viewers and those who are listening to what I have to say will give serious consideration to looking at the NEMA amendments, possibly, or we're going to be facing with these challenges to significant projects that can change the lives of our people. Our country needs energy. And by the way, I read another article, Craig, it was about 100,000 or more jobs, But the value of, from what I understand in my latest check with IGWASA, was that that economy that is going to face the gas cliff is an economy of about 700 billion rand that's exposed. And what we need to be doing, you know, knowing that we have onshore gas, and that Kinetic, I think one of the pipelines runs right through Kinetico's block into Richards Bay. Why are we not accelerating that? I know the Majuba power station is right next to Kinetico. Why isn't there a conversation going on about the impact of those discoveries? We know Sasol faces the gas cliff. Why isn't Sasol having the necessary conversations with the right people? You know, I've approached Sasol with regard to our opportunities, but it doesn't seem to lead anywhere. And I think if you look at the Panda and Tamani field, which was started on, I think it was about, initially it was about 2.4 TCF of reserves. We have to distinguish between contingent and reserves. They're not the same, but contingent resources plus a development plan and a price equals reserves. We also have to look at what's the economies of scale for Sasol to be able to purchase gas at the right price. Certainly, it has an operating cost, so it's important that it be price competitive with regard to domestic gas. I don't necessarily think that LNG imported is going to get to the kind of price competitiveness that Sasol is looking at the moment. So let me leave it at that for the time being. There's a lot. There's a lot of improvement that certainly needs to be done to the UPRDA, at least in my opinion, and the regulations. And we need to be very careful that we do these things the right way, because it has a significant impact on people's choices. Why come to South Africa when I can go to Namibia or some other destination and invest my money there and not have to deal with the uncertainty that's prevalent right now, and not knowing how the laws are going to change in the future? Thank you.
Oh, and Barrisford, so many questions I still have, but we're going to leave it for the Q&A session. And thank you for your time to stay afterwards so that we can answer some of that. And what's really prevalent for me is that the law is trying to solve so many problems. It's trying to solve people being overlooked, having a say in environmental rights. It's trying to solve people doing corruption. But if we don't think about it properly, and I've been blind for what's going on, but if we don't look at it and think about it, we might create new problems that we don't know about. And it's that process before it comes into place that we really put thinkers around the table to think of all the different implications and possibilities, what's going on there, to make the process safe and to keep corruption out and to give everyone a say at the appropriate time. So that definitely has opened up my eyes for that process.
I think we from my side, you know, one has to recognize that this is a highly specialized industry. You know, it requires, and I'm talking about upstream. When it starts coming to the downstream, there are engineers involved. But from an upstream perspective, the decision to spend money and explore for gas or oil is a high risk decision. Not many companies can make that kind of take that investment risk, which requires you to have the best people involved in making the decisions and putting the best economic models together. And I think for the benefit of our country, we need to do things better. Yes. We need to work smarter. And more importantly, we must appreciate the impact of careless drafting of our legislation. And that's why we need to have the benefit of experts in this area so that we don't make the same mistakes as the mistake we made with the amendment of NEMA in 2014. No one anticipated in 2014, or we missed the boat completely, because, prior to 2014, the oil and gas industry was regulated, the environmental provisions were regulated under the MPRDA. When we stopped that, we switched over to NEMA and said from this point onwards, NEMA is going to govern it. And then we had the 2014 amendments of NEMA resulting in this. And quite clearly, we missed the boat and we need to do better, because there are serious financial consequences and in terms of delay. And our country needs the energy, and we have it here. So we need to cut red tape as quickly as possible. I think that's my view.
Thank you, Barrisford. We're going to carry on with this during the Q&A. I wanted to ask Anton a few market questions, but Anton, if you don't mind, I'm going to leave that for the Q&A session. And one quick question to Craig, if we can switch the cameras over from Barrisford to Craig, just to finish this session before we go into Q&A. And Craig, my question to you is, we've heard all of this, and I don't want to become negative, but what can we do? What is the one thing, if you can just, do you have the answers? Can you go and fix it? What is the one quick thing you can tell the audience that we can do, all of us can do, that can help us to the next phase? And if you have more than one thing, we leave that for the Q&A session. But what is the biggest thing that the audience can do to move this forward and get to that win-win situation we are looking for?
Yeah, there we go. Wilmien, in one word, collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And what I mean by that in particular is that with all of these public sector and private sector role players having specific interests that should align to the national interest, commercial interests should align to the national interest. And ultimately, the national interest is to create those jobs, to deal with poverty, unemployment, inequality. And the gas industry can make that contribution, not only through the jobs in the value chain, but also with the royalty tax scheme that will deliver fiscal dividends to this country, like we've seen in places like Guyana, and like we are seeing emerging in Namibia now, with their oil and gas industry taking off. And when one compares South Africa to Namibia, you're dealing with pretty much the same geological and geophysical complex in the Orange Basin that is divided by an imaginary line called the international border. And what's the difference on either side of that border is our regulatory framework. How attractive have we been compared to Namibia? If one thinks about that, one will say, well, if it's the same geology on either side of that line in the Orange Basin, because the Orange Basin straddles the international border at the mouth of the Orange River. If we look at that, what is the difference really? It is investor confidence. And investor confidence, as Barrisford has pointed out very eloquently, is a function of regulatory certainty. Right? So collaboration, and we need a forum for that. And we're in the process of forging the relationships to establish such a multi-stakeholder forum in which government and business could sit together and iron out these issues in a patriotic manner, if I can put it that way, and do so efficiently, right? Because if we don't, we lose those jobs due to the gas cliff, and we might have load shedding coming back if we don't have enough gas to power to help balance the grid. Load shedding could be back. Eskom is doing well right now, no doubt about that. But let's look at that demand as decreased. What happens when we have economic growth and that demand for electricity and other forms of energy, including thermal energy, has to increase to satisfy that economic growth? Are we going to be in a position to capitalize on that, or will we miss the boom? Right?
Craig, so I want to participate, and I love that you say we're going to participate. There's a forum going to be up. The best way for me to participate, will that be in SAOGA? Where will I know when the forum is happening that I can have my 2 cents worth, and all the 2 cents adds up to big changes? Where's the right place for me to collaborate?
Well, this webinar is important. So you're doing the right thing already, Wilmien. Thank you very much. We have to create platforms where people like Barrisford and other stakeholders who are actively involved in projects that could deliver billions of rands of revenue to this country, so that we can meet all of our infrastructure requirements to deliver secure energy at an affordable price with as little environmental impact as possible. And then we can create those jobs. And then we can have new businesses started to participate in the supply chain. And then we could have the fiscal dividends to increase our tax base, so that we can do more social welfare. And you know, right now there are only 7.5 million taxpayers out of the 63 million. Let's just think about that for a moment, right? If we don't increase our tax base and don't increase the number of taxpayers, whether it be income tax or company tax, we are going to suffer worse than we are suffering right now. So where can you contribute? Well, through your business, through an industry association, by directly engaging government, members of parliament, your officials, engage. Apologies that my dog also wants to make a contribution to this debate, but he might know a lot more than some of us. Thank you. Sorry, I'll excuse myself.
So, Craig, we need to stop talking and we need to start building businesses so that we can create jobs, so that we can get a thriving economy for South Africa to keep on growing. Apologies for being slightly longer than normally planned. This is the final part of our webinar for today. Before we go into the Q&A, where we're going to keep the discussion going, I just quickly want to introduce the next webinar to you. We are trying to have a very practical webinar next time to look at different case studies of engine conversions from diesel to gas and what can happen. So 9 October, book the date. If you're subscribed to our email list, you're following us on LinkedIn, YouTube, you will find the next registration link for that. And please, audience, we would love to hear what you want to hear in webinars, so that our webinars serve you at the end of the day. Please let us know. With that, it's the end of this part of the webinar. Stay tuned for the Q&A.